Welcome to the Dissident Mama podcast. Today, my guest is Michael Witkoff. Witkoff is a Jewish convert to Orthodox Christianity and the best-selling author of On the Masons and Their Lies, as well as Theopoetica, a work of classical Christian poetry. Witkoff can also be found under his Benedictine moniker, Brother Augustine, on YouTube and Telegram, where he seeks to edify, educate, and entertain the world from an Orthodox Christian perspective. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you taking your time to listen to me ramble about whatever it is I end up rambling about today. Hopefully it's edifying rambling.
Yes. Well, you tend not to ramble. You tend to say very deep things that touch my soul. So this is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on.
Well, thank God. Well, thank God.
So one of the reasons I like you is you're bold and loving. You marry those two things very well. You're doing some of the necessary, in my opinion, heavy lifting for truth seeking and truth telling. It's a hard thing to pull off in any time, but in these turbulent days, it's really difficult. So it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on my show. But let's get a little bit of your backstory, where you came from and why you do what you do. So I came from atheism, feminism. That was a pretty wild ride, but your journey has been pretty fascinating as well. You didn't just write a book on Freemasonry. You were a Freemason, correct? Can you tell us a bit about that?
I was. Sure. So I joined in my mid-late 20s. I think I was probably 25 or 26, somewhere in that range. It was the first time that I kind of had roots anywhere because I've spent my whole life just moving around. I never had a reason to stay anywhere. So after college, I would just move probably every year or year and a half. You know, I deliberately didn't own more than I could put in my little Toyota Camry and just, pack up and head out whenever I felt like it. But Masonry, I mean, I always say this, and I said in the book, nothing bad happened to me there. I didn't leave because of some bad events. Like, I had a great time there. I loved being in a suit all the time and having all my fancy jewelry and rings and lapel pins. It was the first time I was kind of responsible for other stuff. I mean, I've been a wilderness instructor, so I was responsible for like the lives of teenagers. But I mean, for like a group of guys, where I start off the bottom of the ladder of the officers as what was called the Tyler, where you just set up the lodge and then stand outside the door, making sure no one breaks in, which never happens. But I liked it because, I felt like I was part of something. And I was part of something. But as I started converting to Christianity, first to Protestantism, and then eventually to Orthodoxy, of course, the more I read the Bible and compared it to what happened in Masonry, the more I realized it was just not compatible. And then I remember there was this really horrible, like oppressive feeling that I started getting in the lodge. And I remember the first time it happened, I was in a group called the Royal Arch at the time, which is part of the York Rite. And I was an officer there. I think I was the master of the second veil or third veil, something like that. I was an officer in a bunch of groups. I don't always remember exactly what the title was at the time. I'm going to go with master of the second veil, where you have your red apron, which, by the way, is the Gmail logo. Is just
yeah. So the Gmail logo is just a York Rite apron. It's a white apron with a triangular flap with red trim. And I remember I was sitting in a York Rite meeting, and I got this very sick, heavy, oppressive feeling, and I couldn't quite identify what it was. And I just kind of dismissed it the first time. And then it kept coming up again and again. And I eventually thought, maybe God is trying to get me out of this York Rite, right? And I hadn't made the connection yet that it was all of Masonry. It was specifically that group at that time. So, and I was disappointed a lot of people. Like, I was an officer there. I had responsibilities there. These guys were my friends that had been helping me. I didn't want to disappoint them. But I told them I'm stepping down from my spot. Okay. So then I feel this big wave of relief, right? Like, I had done the right thing, even if I didn't understand why. Then the feeling comes up in Scottish Rite meetings too. I'm thinking, what is going on? Is this God trying to just get me out of Masonry completely? Now, the spirit of Masonry works in an interesting way, or at least it did in my life, my journey, where when you try to leave, the spirit of Masonry tries to get you to stay in different ways. And this happened over and over again on my way out. So right around this time, I got invited into a group that's not a public Masonic group. You have to be invited in. You can't just ask to join. It's essentially an occult group within Masonry. But I was told that it was a group of Christians. So I thought, okay, good. There's a group here for me where I can reconcile these two worldviews that I'm trying to be part of at the same time, and it'll all be fine. So I joined this group, and it turns out it's all about alchemy and sorcery and Kabbalah, like overt teaching of magical stuff in a way that mainstream Masonry just hints at without overtly teaching. And I went up to, I forgot where it was. It might have been Long Beach or something, or Laguna Beach, somewhere in California, for one of these meetings. And I was at a hotel. And I remember after the meeting, I went back to the hotel, and I was in the hot tub. I've had a number of spiritual experiences in hot tubs. I don't know why. It's like a type of baptismal font, I suppose. But I was in there, and I remember I was having this connection to God, so to speak. And I'm not trying to sound like, delusional or a Protestant or something, but something real was happening there in that moment. And I was talking to God. I was saying, I think you want me to leave Masonry. Like, I got excited about this group, and I saw what it was. I don't want to be part of this. I think I get what you're trying to do, God. And I said, but if I leave, I'm not going to have anything. Like, this is my whole social circle at this point. This is what I do with my time when I'm not working. I said, if I leave Masonry, I'm going to have nothing. And I distinctly remember God put on my heart, no, you'll have me. And it totally blew my mind. And I started tearing up, like, with this revelation, if you want to call it that. And I realized what I had to do. So I tried to leave Masonry. I started planting the seeds. Hey, I'm going to demit, as it's called. Of course, everyone's trying to get me to stay. And right at this time, again, this is how the spirit of Masonry tries to trap people, or at least did for me. All of a sudden, there was this problem at a certain lodge in San Diego that I was being tapped to come join so I could help solve. Like, oh, I think you'd be like a friend said, you'd be the right guy to help us solve this big issue. There's this big problem going on. So then I start feeling like I'm getting pulled back, like, okay, maybe I can leave in a few months after I help solve this problem. And it was one of those moments where you just got to shake your head and be like, no, this is nonsense. Something spiritual and damaging is happening here. Something dangerous is happening. I have to ignore all these attempts to keep me there, whether it's, hey, join this group for Christians, or, hey, only you can solve this problem, right? It's like Smokey the Bear, you can prevent Mason fires. It's like, no, I don't care. Someone else can do it. So I eventually just left. And then I found out recently, some of the guys there didn't even know, like, as of a few months ago, that I had left Masonry. So it must not have been a very big deal for them. I remember on my way out, one guy said, you're not the first one to leave for this reason, to go be a Christian. I'm sure you won't be the last one.
Interesting.
And I was scared, bad things have happened to people that have exposed the secrets of Masonry. And I decided, if this ends up with my martyrdom, then, golden ticket to heaven, I suppose. Like, I'm doing this for the right reason. So thank God nothing has happened, and I hope that nothing happens moving forward. But yeah, I've never once regretted leaving.
What do you mean something happens? Like, you get erased? What do you mean?
So in the degrees, every degree that you see, you have to swear a different violent, bloody oath upon yourself of all the bad things that are going to happen to you if you reveal the secrets, right?
Okay.
But there was a guy named William Morgan, Captain William Morgan, not to be confused with the Captain Morgan rum, in the 19th century. I believe it was the end of the 19th century, had published a bunch of the secrets of Masons, and to this day, his body has not shown up.
Okay.
So there's been some curious things like that. Jack the Ripper, there was some Masonic connection to that as well, that killer in London. I think it was in London, wasn't it? Somewhere in England. Yeah. Like, the thing that he wrote on the wall was a Masonic phrase that the police, when they showed up, erased. They washed it off the wall before the investigation started. So there was a connection there. And I didn't know whether something would happen or not, but I thought it was worth the risk to get my message out about why it's not compatible. And the craziest thing is, I had no audience at the time. I had no platform. No one had any idea who I was.
Right.
I just wrote this book thinking maybe this will be helpful to someone. And now it's turned into this big ministry that continues to grow every day. So God had a plan for this, even before I had any idea what was happening. I just said, okay, let's go on a ride,
Right, exactly. And it's interesting, the person that made that comment to you as you were leaving, I'm sorry, my dog's barking. I don't know if y'all can hear that. Anyway, that's my dog, if you can. That somebody had said to you, you're not the first person to leave for Christianity. So It's kind of a tacit or outright admission that, okay, this thing can't kind of jibe with Christianity, even though they tried to kind of pull you in with the mysticism and stuff, or occult, really, I guess.
Yeah. Well, some of the more serious occult people there are very well aware that it's not compatible with Christianity. The guys that think it is are not very mature thinkers, let's say.
Okay.
And there's a lot of Christians there that don't see any problem. but the ones that actually understand what's going on know very well that it's not compatible with Christianity. In fact, before my conversion, I was commiserating with the same guy that said that to me earlier, whining with him about how, oh, Masonry used to teach all this great stuff before those Christians got here and ruined everything, right? Those words left my mouth at one point. So the guys that know what's going on definitely know that it's not a Christian place.
All right.
And they don't want it to be.
Right. It's a competitor, right?
Yeah, it is. It's a competing religion. It's a separate religion.
So, you know, you not only felt ruthless, came into this thing where you felt like you had identity. Well, you're also ethnically Jewish. And then all of a sudden, years later, or maybe it's months later, I'm not sure how quickly it happened, you become an Orthodox Christian. I'm sure that was very hard too, because, you know, how did your friends and your family react to this? And well, before we get to that, before their reaction, and if you know, felt like you were abandoned by people, tell us, you went to Protestantism after that, a little bit of Taoism. I read somewhere you dabbled with that.
Well, that was previously. I mean, I'd been through different types of non-Christian spiritual paradigms. No, I started becoming Protestant because I had a really horrible back injury in my late 20s, which I just had again, the same injury last week, actually. But thank God it's better this time. And the woman that was helping me with my back, a myofascial release therapist, it's like a very gentle kind of massage, stretching the fascia and whatnot. She was a super Christian, but I thought of as a Jesus freak at the time. So I'd go in, there was like quotes from scripture on the walls and everything. And I'd walk in all stoned and talking about some party I'd been to. Like I was a degenerate back then. And after I started reading the scriptures and having certain experiences, I said to her, hey, you know what? I want to go to church with you sometime. And she was overjoyed, said, I've been praying for you for like a year and a half. I'm so happy. Let me bring you. Let me introduce you to everybody. So I went with her to a Wesleyan church. Not that I knew anything about denominations at the time or anything about Jesus or theology, nothing about that. I went with her on a Sunday evening to the young adult service. I think it was 6 o'clock at night. And the pastor, I mean, the sermon that he gave, it was like God was talking directly to me through him, because he was putting all these problems in my life in this perspective that I'd never heard before, like clicking things into place in this big puzzle, like, oh, when you sin in this way, these are the problems you have. And I thought, that's how I live. And those are the problems I have. Like, you know, I felt understood. And so I just never stopped going until I eventually became Orthodox. I kept going back. That pastor, I owe a huge gratitude for my conversion. I mean, he's one of the most gifted speakers that I've ever heard in my life. Really serious guy. And, you know, thankfully Wesleyan and Orthodox theology are not a huge leap apart, especially compared to certain other Protestant denominations. And even though now, you know, I would look at that as very ecumenist and kind of too open-minded, because the church was very much like, we don't care what you believe. Come on in, have some coffee, talk to people. Like, it's not about doctrine, just come hear the word of God. You know, that's what I needed at the time. I could never have gone from Masonry to Orthodoxy. There was a lot of refiguring of my mind that had to take place first.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very common. There's a lot of converts, obviously, in America that come from Protestant backgrounds, even Catholic backgrounds too. And I see there's a cradle people or people who have been, you know, Orthodox for 20, 30 years. I think sometimes get miffed about that I think they're glad we're Orthodox, but they kind of want you to be quiet too, even though, you know, like for example, I would say, you know, monks and priests and, you know, learned people who went to seminaries, they know way more theology than I do, but I'm always learning because it's a deep well. However, you know, people like us, especially former degenerates like us, can speak to the evil that the world is because we lived it.
Exactly.
And I think that's a lot of what I think scares some people who, you know, just kind of like the even keel thing and everything was comfortable before you rabble rousers came in here. So I find that interesting. So there's a little bit of pushback within Orthodoxy. We can get to that in a minute, but let's get back to, okay, you're this ethnically Jewish guy in California. You are Freemason. Now you're an Orthodox Christian. What was the reaction of friends and family?
So I have been blessed with a personality that has never cared what other people thought of me, and that going back as long as I can remember. So I mean, other people's opinions of what I was doing or not doing never had a bearing on my behavior, for better and worse. I mean, there were times
Mhm.
when I should have listened to other people,
Right.
should have listened to my parents, in retrospect. But at the time, if I felt like doing something, I would do it. If I felt like studying something, I would study it. Join some group, I would join it. And so there wasn't a lot of pushback really from anyone, but it's also possible that there was and I didn't notice because I just kind of don't register that kind of thing in the first place. I remember it was scary though the first time I told my mom that I was going to church, right? I've been bar mitzvahed and raised Jewish and all this stuff. And the first time I said, "Hey, so how's it going?" We're talking on the phone. It's like, "Good. I actually I went to a church on Sunday." She goes, "Oh, okay, but you're not like worshiping Jesus or anything, are you?" And I said, "Actually, yeah, that is what they do at church." And so she was a little weirded out. I don't think this was a direction she ever saw my life going in. But my parents' position is, even if they don't care about God or whatever, they're very, very happy that at least I'm not living the life that I used to live. And every time I talk to my dad, he tells me that he was really surprised at the wedding about how great and nice everyone was at the church. He was telling people there, he said, "Wow, Michael's been talking about how great this place is for years. And I now I understand, like, it's really like a big family." So I think that had somewhat of an impact. And, uh, most of my family didn't come to the wedding because most of my guests were not vaccinated. And we put on the invitation, there was a no mask rule for the guests. My dad was an exception because he has lung problems and he was really afraid and everything. So I said, okay, you get this one exception here. So most of my family watched the wedding on YouTube. It was live streamed from my parish. And then turned out my grandfather had watched it, my 96-year-old grandfather. And from what I'm told, he started looking into what is Orthodox Christianity afterwards. I don't think he'd ever heard of it before. But the service looks a lot like a liturgical Jewish service in
Right.
certain ways. There's a guy in special clothes carrying special objects around a room, and it's structured. So I think he at least found it interesting. But there's really been no blowback of any meaningful kind. And even if there were, I would just take it as a sign I was on the right path anyway.
Right.
But since I'm kind of just I've always just been my own sovereign, autonomous person. Like if I had lost friends over it, I wouldn't have necessarily cared too much either.
Right. Interesting. Well, no wonder I like you so much. People aren't made like that much anymore. Everybody seems to care, like obsess about what other people think about them to a degree. And it's like you
Yeah.
said, maybe
Yeah.
sometimes we should listen and, you want to be mannerly and not mean, but gosh, people believe all sorts of crazy things. Why would you care what they think of you,
Yeah. I put I don't know if you read that poetry book, the Theopoetica book that I wrote, but there's a poem in there called Contra Mundum, written in terza rima, the rhyme scheme that Dante came up with for the Inferno, or for the Divine Comedy, I should say. And Contra Mundum kind of explains my whole combative sovereign attitude and the things that I got into in the world, because Contra Mundum means against the world, which kind of is how I always felt, And then how blessed am I to find a religion and a faith where the whole point is to be against the world.
Yes.
I don't have to be by myself. Now I can fight the world with all these wonderful people.
That's right.
So I'm at the end of my spiritual journey. I mean, in terms of what group I'm going to join,
Right.
Obviously I'm very far from the perfection we all seek.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's just great. I love it.
End of the road. Yes, I often say that, if people wonder why I write some of the essays that I do, because it's the end of the road. This is it. This is the one true faith, and it needs defending sometimes, from perhaps maybe not a perspective of clergy, which it does need that too, but from the laity too. I mean, we absolutely play a role. We're part of it. I wanted to ask you, sorry, I have post-COVID brain. What was I going to ask you?
Oh,
It was
you doing all right?
Yeah. Oh, I am doing fine. I actually did an interview when I had COVID, so that was pretty fun. Anyway, it was
that is one of the symptoms, podcasting. Yeah,
that's right. Anyway, it was impromptu. If it comes back to me, I'll ask you. Okay, so
sure.
Here's another unpopular thing you do, Mister. You stand against the progressivism of secular Jews. You've interviewed Michael Jones, the author of The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. The SPLC tells us he's this horrible anti-Semite and a white supremacist, and you don't mind triggering the ADL. In fact, I think you might kind of like it. So
I do.
I had been following you for a while, but this was something that I read. You posted it back in the fall, and that's when I was like, wow, I got to get this guy on my show. So I'm just going to read. You posted it on Telegram and probably elsewhere. So you said, as a Jewish convert to Orthodox Christianity, with a fairly wide set of historical books under my belt, it troubles me to see some hierarchs and channels following the world's narrative about anti-Semitism, which you put in quotes, and all the things that have to be done to combat anti-Semitism. I'll tell you directly, as a 100% pure-blooded Ashkenazi man, how to fix anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism will end when the faithless Jews leave other groups of people alone and stop trying to transform their nations and cultures in ways that invariably harm the populations in question. It's really not that complicated, but it is.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
It's not, but it is. So kind of parse that out. Why did you feel the need to say that? I mean, do you feel like there's an anti-Christian component to this, an anti-Gentile thing? I mean, what's the deal?
That is the most complicated question, isn't it? I had a long conversation with my dad. They rented a house near the beach in California for a week last year. The whole family was there, and I had dinner with him. And he likes the ADL, and I was trying to explain to him what kind of person Jonathan Greenblatt is and how they're actually making the situation worse and making people hate Jews more. I don't think my message really got through. My dad was not thrilled that I've done a show with E. Michael Jones. He's very well aware of who E. Michael Jones is, who I gave a speech next to at the Trad Forum in Indiana once upon a time. I can't believe that was less than a year ago. Man, time flies. So I think there is some people do hate Jews just because they're Jews, right? Just like some people hate white people just because they're white. So there is a sense of the word racism that is actually real, and which of course I'm against, as I think everyone is. But that's not how the word either anti-Semitism or racism is used in our culture. It usually just means, well, the word racist just means white, and anti-Semite means anyone who notices or criticizes not only any individual Jew, but any pattern that you see Jews doing. And there's this very strange schizophrenic thing that these secular Jews do, where they will write articles in what E. Michael Jones calls the Jew for Jew media, bragging about their control of Hollywood or how they're behind the gay rights movement, bragging about it. But then in the Jew for Gentile movement, they say it's anti-Semitic for you to notice the things they brag about to each other. And for some reason, I don't really understand. They're not capable of understanding how angry this makes people. Like, they don't seem to get that people can see what they're doing very openly and the kind of double-minded hypocrisy that it demonstrates. And every time they shut someone down for being a, quote, anti-Semite, they're saying, we can't counter your argument, so we're just going to shut you up. And I think that they believe that's going to shame the person into changing their mind, when all it really does is, first of all, make them angrier. And then if you take away their ability to vent something verbally, well, maybe now you're adding to the physical violence that might be vented through instead. And the worst part about that is I think some of them probably know that and actually like it, because the more attacks against synagogues there are, even though half the time it's Jews doing it to each other, the more of these attacks there are, the more money they can make fundraising to stop anti-Semitism. Right. So for example, I want to say it was 2018. Don't quote me on the year. Michael David Kedar was an Israeli who was responsible for 9% of all bomb threats called into synagogues for the entire year. One guy. Now, all these threats were included in the anti-Semitic incidents they were using to raise funds. And when it turned out it was just one Jewish guy responsible, they didn't remove any of that from the statistics, right? They kept saying this is the number. And it's kind of like, it's a grievance industry, just like feminism is, right? The rape numbers are not real. We know they never have been real. The 1 out of every 4 on college campus. It's the same as, 1 out of every 3 white people is a secret Nazi. Grievance pays well in this country because we have this dynamic where victimhood is actually your key to power, which is a very Jewish dynamic in and of itself. It's very Machiavellian. It makes people mad when they can tell what you're doing, especially if you keep doing it in front of them and then silence them or pathologize them. So that's probably the hardest thing emotionally for me, is talking about stuff like this, because it is my people ethnically, right? It's my entire family. And I'm not trying to bring any blowback on them. So even last night, for example, I wrote another article for Gab yesterday, Gab News. This one's called Great Men of Christ, St. John Chrysostom. And there's a line in there that I was kind of going back and forth on, of saying, how many bishops would excommunicate us for saying even a fraction of the things that St. John said about Jews, with a link to his homilies against Jews or Judaizers, depending on who you ask what the book's about. And I went back and forth on whether to include this, because I know my family is aware of my activities. I know how seeing stuff like that from me can sting them and they don't understand it. And so I have to constantly grapple with, do I say this thing that I know the people that love me is going to make them mad? Or do I tell the truth for the sake of Christ? And, there's that verse in scripture where Christ says, using very hyperbolic language, I think, says, if you do not hate your family, what is something like that? You have to hate your family in order to truly love him. Something like that. Now, obviously, I don't hate my family or anything, but the point he's making is, unless you love him more than your blood relations, you don't really love him the way that he is calling us to do. And the interesting thing about that verse is, if I'm remembering correctly, he's talking to Jews. So he's talking about exactly the thing that I was experiencing last night, trying to think about, do I include this or not? Like, are you prioritizing those close to you physically over me, or are you going to tell the truth, even if it's something that they wouldn't like, right? He's not saying to despise your family. It's not what he's saying. He does not hate his wife, his mother more than me, or whatever that exact verse is. So it's very taxing on me emotionally and psychologically to do this. But at the end of the day, it's stuff that's true. And this is part of why I think Gab is so important. Like, I deal with morons on Gab all the time. People that no matter what I do, I'm evil because I'm Jewish, right?
Yes.
And I'm kind of in this weird spot where there's some of the more liberal leaning Orthodox accuse me of being a white supremacist, fascist Nazi. But then the people that are actually those things accuse me of being a subversive evil Jew. So I can't really win on the internet either way. But it's important that you let people vent their anger verbally, because that's what prevents them from venting it physically. And that's one of the purposes of free speech. So then the question is, are the people censoring these kinds of sentiments doing it on purpose to cause more violence so that they can then crack down with more draconian laws and fundraise, or are they just stupid? And that's always the ultimate question, right? I think it was Mark Twain that said, it's impossible to tell whether those in charge are malicious and clever or well-meaning and stupid.
Right.
And it's very hard to tell. It's a very good point that he made.
And it's probably a blend of both, right? Because you do probably, probably, but definitely have people who absolutely know what they're doing, and they do it for popularity and money and all sorts of things. And, evildoers who do want more violence, but then you have the useful idiots, right? Who really are just naive. I mean, I used to be one of those people. So that's why I know they're out there.
Yeah, I was a lefty once upon a time. Yeah.
So
did you ever see a show called Girl Writes What? A woman named Karen Strawn. Are you familiar with her?
Oh, yes.
She was the first one that, when I found her, I think I was in college, that really started pulling me out of my feminism, leftism. I mean, I never called myself a feminist, but there were ways that I was thinking that would have aligned with that paradigm. When I heard her explaining things logically, she was the first one that really kind of shook me in a way that led me to go down the rabbit hole, so to speak. I don't think she's a Christian, but she had a very interesting channel.
Yeah, and I don't know if she puts out much these days, but yeah, I've watched a lot of her stuff and heard her interviewed before. But it's interesting because, I bet she gets a lot of pushback. Well, we don't need a woman running the men's rights movement. And it's like, well, if somebody's speaking truth, what does it matter? And I get that a lot of people in that movement feel burned by women, but shouldn't you celebrate the unicorn? That's kind of how I see it.
Well, unfortunately, the guy who runs A Voice for Men promotes prostitution and stuff like that. So,
oh, really?
He's not helping anyone in the long run. Yeah, Paul Elam, which I don't think is his real name anyway.
Yeah. I haven't really looked at that, the official. I don't know. I mean, I guess you would call it a movement, but I guess the hangers on, maybe they're or grifters, obviously. Yeah, that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I was part of that for a while.
Yeah, and
true.
You can empathize.
Sorry, I don't mean to derail you.
No, that's fine. You can empathize why people get to that point, but it's still not good for them in the long run, or society, or children.
Totally.
Okay, so So yeah, I find it interesting. You brought up some really great points. The gaslighting, right? You can read Haaretz and the Jerusalem Post and the Israeli Times, and they say all sorts of things. But yet, if talk about it, so my big thing would be, okay, I used to be a feminist. I can still critique modern women, right? Because they're overwhelmingly crazy.
Yep.
And we can see how the feminization of culture and all these kinds of things hurts people, hurts society, hurts individuals. And that doesn't mean I hate all women. So that's kind of my thing when I'm like, it's okay
Right.
to see patterns. And especially if you read Haaretz and they're writing a story about how great feminism is. And oh, by the way, Jews invented feminism. I mean, that's what they'll say. So,
Yeah.
And then when you try to speak out
And
against
then they
something,
accuse you of hatred.
yes,
Is the weird part. Like,
right.
I don't feel hatred when I'm doing this, but they're telling me that I'm feeling an emotion,
Right.
which is very strange to dictate to someone else how they're feeling when they're sitting there saying, no, that's not how I feel.
Right.
It's very odd.
And in fact, it's loving. I mean, I was a feminist. I felt the spiritual, physical, mental damage from it. I don't want anyone to go through that, men, women, or children. And so I don't know.
Of course.
The whole gaslighting part. And you also use an important word, patterns. Our brains see patterns. That's how we categorize things. That's how we, stay away from the hot fire and don't burn ourselves because we've seen 5 people put their hand in the fire and burn themselves, So that's just so frustrating me. So when people point out patterns and do it in a bold and loving way, I really love that. And I think one of the more important questions too is the, like you said, talking about things, airing grievances, even people saying hate speech, for goodness sake, it keeps violence in check, because it, you don't want to shake up that soda bottle. So for example, I heard somebody, I think it was Dennis Prager say, okay, in the 1930s, the most pro-communist press outside of the USSR was the Yiddish press in America. So instead of people getting upset that you're saying that, the question is, why were they so pro-communist and why can't we talk about it?
Exactly. And the more, I mean, I've been doing like a 1.5 year long study of 20th century anti-communist movements, let's say, and it's the same thing everywhere. Every time it's the same complaints about the same kind of people. Not all of them had Jews as a focal point of their stuff. Like Franco didn't care much about Jews. Mussolini didn't care much. There were actually a lot of Jewish fascists in Italy. 10,000 of them at its peak, registered members of the fascist party. But you see the similar comments about communism, especially Freemasons, international bankers, whether people realize the ethnic component of that or not. Not that they're all Jewish, but it's an overrepresentation.
Yeah.
But you're not allowed to notice unless you're Jewish bragging about it to someone else. Then you're allowed to talk about it.
And then I heard it once said, I don't know if you said this or not, but I just saw it somewhere recently, and it said that the only true anti-Semitism, if we're going to use that word, let's just take it for what it is, the real anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews. If there's any true anti-Semitism, it's denying that modern Jews cannot be saved by Christ. What do you think about that? Because I find that, I'd say that would be the true definition of it. I don't know. Have you ever heard that before?
Yeah. So there's actually a verse in scripture that's kind of cryptic where Christ is saying, if you insult him and repent, he can forgive you for it, and he will. But blasphemy against the Holy Spirit is unforgivable. What does that mean? Blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. Well, the church fathers said it means denying that someone can be saved. So when you have people saying like, oh, X race is subhuman, they can't be saved because they don't have souls, like this kind of silly nonsense that you do see on Gab sometimes. That's the unforgivable sin, according to Christ. That's blaspheming against the Holy Spirit. And I would say it's very anti-Semitic to tell Jews that they're saved without Christ, that they're chosen, that they're special because of their bloodline or their family name, because now you're denying them the possibility of eternal life because you've convinced them, you've lied to them and told them they're going to be fine. And that's just not the case. There's nothing more loving you can say to someone than to bring them to Christ and to explain to them the importance of Christ. So, and the weirdest thing is you have all these Christian groups, including, I think the Pope himself, didn't he say that it's a sin to try and convert people, or it's a sin to try and convert Jews? Yeah. So this is just the ultimate upside down world where now under the guise of, quote, loving your neighbor, you're actually condemning them to hell. This
Yeah.
is the kind of strange, crazy world we live in. Or when Protestants say that Jews have their own covenant with God, right? Dual covenant theology. This is all just modern nonsense. You won't find anything like this for the first 1,500 years of Christianity, maybe even more than that.
And that's I really like the point you made, talking about scripture, because I've said it before that there are some wackadoodle left-winger woke people that aren't. And when I say unsavable, I guess I am talking about Christianity too, but I think some modern people are just so indoctrinated that they may just be lost causes. So I think I will have to revisit that and pray about that. I probably shouldn't be saying that.
Well, there are people that have given themselves over to evil so completely that they're not going to be saved, but it's because of their decision. It's not that God can't save them. It's that they have, like, there are people, violent people in prison, and ask any priest who's on prison ministry, they'll tell you there are some people that they're not going to change. They've made their decision. They've committed themselves to just a blackened soul. And, for those people, maybe it's better for their soul to have the death penalty. And that's something that causes a lot of problems, a lot of controversy to say. But if someone can't stop themselves from destroying their own souls and other people, maybe it's better for them to just not have the opportunity to do that anymore.
Right.
And, there's a verse in scripture about how it's better to have a millstone tied around your neck and drown in the sea than to lead the little ones astray. And some church fathers interpreted that, at least on one layer, to mean if someone can't stop themselves from being a pedophile, if it's just they've given themselves over to it, maybe they shouldn't be alive anymore.
Right.
Not out of anger or out of hatred for the person, but out of love for their victims, and on some level, even for them, which is a really kind of tough thing to get your mind around. But I'm glad I'm not in charge of that kind of decision.
Yes.
Also.
Well, let's go back to the catch-22. You may be called an anti-Semite or, a right-winger or something by, whatever, progressive Christians. But then, I've seen some of the stuff, that you got to deal with on Gab, where you'll always be a subversive no matter what. It's interesting. So recently I interviewed Ashley Ray Goldenberg, Communism Kills, and there were people who would comment, don't you know she's a Jew? Yeah, and there's nothing that she can say that will, be truth, even if it sounds truthful. She's a subversive. I'm just like, are these people all feds? I mean, what do you think? I know there are some hateful people that just hate Jews.
There are some.
Really, it's over the top. And it's not that many people, but they're so loud and so obnoxious.
I think it's a combination of feds and mentally ill. Now, to be fair,
that's synonymous, right?
Right. In today's day and age, yeah. To be fair, though, like when someone sees me writing an article or making a video and they find out I'm a Jewish convert and they're kind of suspicious at first, I don't begrudge them that, because if I were not me, I would also be, I wouldn't accuse, but I'd say, all right, well, let me hold on before I make up my mind. Let me see what this guy's all about. So I totally understand, because when you see someone Jewish converting to something, like, and there have been false converts in the past. So I don't begrudge them that. I totally understand. The strange thing about it, I was just about to say something quite profound, and I forgot what it was.
My COVID brain is rubbing off.
Oh, I remember. No. I have severe insomnia. That's why my brain just shuts down on me sometimes. Can't remember things. The strange thing is I'm always accused on Gab by these people of being anti-white, right? Regardless of the amount of times that I've explicitly talked about trying to help white people and done it publicly with my real name and face that none of these people are ever going to have the spine to do. Despite that, and then they'll tell me that I'm being anti-white, for example, by saying that Christianity is for everybody. Or someone asked me yesterday, if you were a priest and a black parishioner and white parishioner wanted to get married, would you do it? So of course I would marry them. Why would I not marry them? So they accuse me of being anti-white because Christianity is not globalist, as they call it globalist, but it's universal. It's Catholic, right? It has a universal aspect to it. It's for everybody. But the weird thing is, from their perspective, it's not any more anti-white than it would be anti-black or anti-anything else, right? From that secular materialist perspective, it would be equally against all the races. But they, because of my ethnicity, I think, and because they're so hyper-focused, whether they're feds, mentally ill, or as you said, both, they perceive everything as being anti-white, despite the fact that all I'm trying to do is reiterate what the saints and fathers have said. I've been wrong about many things and corrected myself many times, publicly and privately. If I'm saying something that the saints disagreed with, please let me know and I'll update my opinion. And they say, oh, Christianity has been subverted by you people and become anti-white. I'm like, well, what am I saying that's any different from what the apostles were saying, where Paul says there's neither Greek nor Jew in Christ? Because not that ethnicity is wiped out, it's not, it's an important thing, but Christ is for everybody. That's the point, right? We don't put our ethnicity above God. Like Father Turbo said on our interview, he put his ethnicity on the altar, laid it down on the altar, because Christ is the most important thing. That doesn't mean he's not black, right? Married a black woman, has a black family. It's not that it's negated, it's just that it's transfigured and that there's something more important than ethnicity. But if you say that to these people, they just accuse you of being an anti-white subversive Jew. So I just can't win on Gab.
Yeah.
Hey, at least Torba and some of the other guys, the news editor, they understand where I'm coming from and seem to appreciate my work. So most people seem to appreciate it. But you're always going to get the crazies. It comes with the territory, as you yourself recently found out with the Sarkeesian incident, the quote public orthodoxy incident.
Yeah, I like it. The Sarkeesian incident. That sounds really dramatic. It was
well, back
pretty
in the
wild.
day, when anti-feminism was taking off, you had Anita Sarkeesian, right? That was the big target of a lot of anti-feminist stuff. And now you have this, whatever this guy, what is it, Aram Sarkeesian or some other, what is it with Sarkeesians? Why are these people so subversive, the Sarkeesians? But and then as Father John Whiteford was pointing out yesterday, this guy is like pro-gay, pro everything. He's not even Orthodox, pretending to be like the arbiter of who's Orthodox and who isn't. And the guy's a Monophysite. So it's all just so silly.
Yeah, well, you have this group of religious experts, and they all have PhDs, and they write for these religion, publications and get money from universities and I guess NGOs and all sorts of stuff. And, they're just supposed to be the arbiters of what orthodoxy is. It's very strange. But I've moved on from that, and I got to vent about it. So no, I was just going to say, it actually turned out to be a good thing, because on one hand, it's like, oh, if I comment, it's just giving fuel to the fire. But then I was like, well, I do want to comment because I think it proves exactly why we need the fellowship. So so it was kind of therapeutic to write about it too, and then call out people who were, these people that straddle the line where they're like, oh, well, I'm not a left winger, but I'm going to just even give little bits of ammunition to what the Sarkeesians of the world are saying. I mean, I find those are the people I want to really reach out to them, because I'm like, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. You're shooting me in the foot right now, but you're going to end up shooting yourself in the foot too, because we're all on the same team.
I hope we can meme this into existence. I hope we can meme this. What are the Sarkeesians doing now? Or anytime one of these people attacks you, like, oh, it's just another Sarkeesian. I want to bring that into being.
All right, you do it, and I'll back you up, and we'll toggle off each other.
Okay.
That'll be awesome.
Perfect. Perfect. Some of the dumbest people I've ever encountered are academics with letters after their name.
Yes.
And they just mask their stupidity behind bigger words. That's really all that it is.
And make up words. I'm like, okay, whatever. I may just have a bachelor's degree, but that's just word salad. Come on, nobody even knows what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So let's go back a little bit to anti-whiteness being in Christianity, which I think in some quarters of Protestantism, I mean, it is anti-white, and they are deifying Black people, which is not good for Black people either, right? This is not good for anyone.
No, it's not.
So I have a few friends, pretty good friends, who are into Messianic Judaism. I didn't even know what this was till a couple of years ago, till my first friend started telling me about it. So again, I can kind of sympathize. They see this lukewarm leftist American mainline Christianity and how, for lack of better words, fake and gay it's become. And then they see this as, maybe being authentic. Are you seeing this, or is this just because I happen to have two friends? I think it's happening all around. Is that something that you see or that you know about? That people are looking into Messianic Judaism?
Sure. I went to a service of theirs myself when I was a Protestant. I wore a yarmulke to the service, believe it or not. There was a family at our wedding that were Messianic Jews before they became Orthodox. As Brother Nathaniel says, they're really just Baptists with yarmulkes. And I can tell you that when I went to the Messianic Jewish service, I found it very weird and off-putting. I thought I was going to like it, but it's very strange. You have like a shofar and a cross on the wall, and there's stuff in Hebrew, and they're all Zionists, of course. They're always talking about how great Israel is. And Father James Bernstein was one of the founders of the Messianic Jewish movement in this country, the Jews for Jesus movement, in San Francisco or Berkeley, somewhere up in hippie land in California. And then I want to say 16 years later, he found Orthodoxy and realized that there was already, the Messianic Church that accepted Jews, and he gave up on Jews for Jesus and became an Orthodox priest. And he actually wrote a book called Surprised by Christ, explaining his journey from Messianic Judaism into the Orthodox priesthood. It was the first book that my baptismal priest ever gave me, in fact.
Wow.
He's retired now, but he's got some interesting videos online. The Jewish Roots of Orthodox Worship on YouTube. He's got a whole hour and a half long talk about it. And I think he's a good resource, just his existence and work, a good resource for people that want to understand the transition from Second Temple Judaism to Christianity that took place in the first century. I got the feeling in the Messianic Jewish church group that they kind of were straddling the fence and wanted the best of both worlds. But it doesn't make sense because the Jewish festivals were all fulfilled and made obsolete by Christ's birth and death and resurrection. Like, what is the point of Yom Kippur, a day of atonement, when the going to the cross was the ultimate day of atonement for the sins of humanity? Why would you celebrate a festival looking forward to it or talking about it when that was completed already? So I felt like I was moving backwards, looking forward to things that have already happened. And I don't think there's a way to justify that. In fact, if you read through some of the earliest Christian writings, they're screaming, the saints are screaming through the written word at Christians who still want to celebrate Jewish festivals. St. John Chrysostom, against the Jews, that's largely what it's about. Christians who are becoming Judaizers and want to keep participating in Jewish festivals. St. Ignatius of Antioch writes about it at the very end of the very beginning of the 2nd century. So if you actually look at how Christianity has gone over time and what they believed, there was never even a hint that this kind of thing would be acceptable. It's just a way of subverting Christianity to try and get them to, it's almost like denying Christ to go back and celebrate these Jewish festivals like Passover and Yom Kippur that are fulfilled already. I would show them that book, Surprised by Christ by Father James Bernstein, and maybe that'll help move their mind and soul in the right direction.
Man, I had no idea you would have such good information for me. I thought you would just have an opinion. I mean, that is amazing that this guy who started it and then became Orthodox. I had no idea.
Yeah.
You're blowing my mind. Yeah, I'm buying those books for my friends.
Good. Maybe they'll love them.
Yes.
Yeah, I hope it helps.
So you had mentioned Father Turbo Qualls. You had him on recently, back in the fall. Really great interview, but I found some interest. You find out things about the host when you're hearing an interview. So you had attended the an American Renaissance conference, kind of when the alt-right was in its heyday. And the thing you said that really struck me was no one there mentioned God. And I agree. Many reactionaries and people on the right have an atheism problem, and they think, again, Christianity is the really radical ones. Christianity is this, Jewish conspiracy and all these types of things. I mean, ideology is just not enough. And I think every day you see that with how people who are in the movement and then get cast aside or whatever, any movement, any reactionary movement, it's just not enough. What got you, I guess, I don't know if you would still consider yourself right or traditionalist or what got you out of that? Was it just specifically that where's God in all this?
I don't know. I just consider myself Orthodox at this point. And honestly, there's this weird effect happening where these morons on Gab are accusing me of being anti-white so much that I'm almost like questioning why I'm even trying to help people like this in the first place and just kind of losing interest in it. So they're having the reverse effect of what they're trying to. So when I went to the Amaran conference, it was this great hotel, the Montgomery Bell in Burns, Tennessee. There was a bunch of speeches by Jared Taylor and a bunch of other people. I met F. Roger Devlin there. I didn't know he was going to be there. I hadn't heard his name in probably 5 years. He wrote, what was that book called? Something in Utopia. Sex and Feminist Utopia, something like that. Some really great book I'd read earlier on in my life. Not great from a Christian perspective, but great from like a red pill awakening to feminism perspective. And I just met this guy on the dock at the hotel. He had a cool tie. I said, "Hey, great tie." We talked about ties for a while. And I said, "Oh, I'm Michael." He said, "Oh, I'm Roger Devlin." I said, "Sounds really familiar. What did you, Sexual Power in Utopia, maybe?" He said he wrote this book. I said, "Oh my gosh, you're that guy. Nice to meet you." There were journalists there, tons of Antifa there. Lacey McAuliffe was there. There's actually a video that you can find of Richard Spencer debating with this big fat black guy, telling him that he'll never be British. It's kind of funny to watch the way this goes down, because the guy's obviously, he has the British accent. Richard Spencer telling me you can't be English because you're not white. I was actually there, present for that debate. I was watching that happen while it was being filmed off to the side. And there was only
this is circa what year? What are we talking about? Just a few years ago?
This is my kryptonite, is when things happened.
Yeah.
Like,
okay.
ask my wife. I will get things wrong by massive amounts of time of when things happened exactly.
Okay.
I want to say it was 17 or 18.
Okay.
2017
That
or 18.
makes sense. That's kind of the
I'm going to commit to that. I'm going to commit to that number, 17 and
Okay.
18. And the speeches were interesting. John Derbyshire gave a very interesting speech. But there was two things that I noticed. One was these people aren't offering any solution whatsoever. They're just kind of pointing out why they think things are the way they are. Even though I think American Renaissance is, for what it is, it's probably the highest kind of journalism that sphere of the internet has to offer. You know, Ann Coulter's written for it, who I stopped liking now that she's super pro-vax, but
Yeah.
I liked her stuff beforehand. And there was no mention of God, except for, it was one Southern guy actually at one of the tables, because they have tabling for a while where people give out their flyers. Hey, look at my website, whatever. There's one Southern guy was talking about God, but it had no place in the conference as a whole. And so for those two reasons, no solutions and it's godless, I just kind of stopped caring. And I wasn't even like really a Christian at that time yet. I was a Gnostic Christian. I considered myself a Cather. I went through a brief Cather phase, which was this medieval heresy. Even my name tag at the event was based on, is Le Bonhomme, which is what the Cathars called themselves. That's what Richard Spencer, that was our only interaction, was he looked at my name tag, he said, Le Bonhomme, tu parles français? Like asking if I speak French. I said, oh no, a little bit, but it's just a thing. And so it was bizarre. I mean, some of these Antifa people were so fat they had to sit down in the shade the entire time while the rest of them were protesting, which I found amusing.
Wow.
I had a journalist lady, so I think she's from Pakistan or something, but she works for some British media outlet, asked to interview me at some point, because she was interesting. Why are people here? Like, why are you here? I said, well, I think it's because when people realize that the government isn't going to help them, they want to try and find a different way of getting their needs met. And she said, oh, that was a great line. Like, can I interview you? Can we talk about that? I kind of looked around and thought, no, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't want to do it. And then, 6 months or a year later, there's this Netflix documentary. It's called like Summer of Hate or something, that was all based on, or partially based on the research she did there. So I narrowly avoided being featured on the Summer of Hate or whatever it was called documentary.
Wow.
But one thing I've noticed with these journalists is they always act really friendly.
Oh yeah.
They're really kind of scumbags. I had a left-wing lady blogger write a couple hit pieces, or a hit piece about me in my Gab article recently. She's been using my article as like clickbait for the last several weeks. Like, frankly, she owes me a debt of gratitude for giving her something to do with her time. I wish she would spend her time being a better writer, frankly, because the article is borderline unreadable. That's neither here nor there. But even she messaged me on Gab about the article before she wrote it, pretending to be really friendly. Oh, I can't wait to hear from you. Thank you so much for your time. But I knew immediately what was happening, because I know what kind of people these are. They always act really nice and friendly, and even when they're trying to tear you down. That was a very long answer to a short question, but
No.
yeah, there was no God there, even though I had a good time at the conference.
Yeah.
Not everyone loved that I was Jewish, but I had a good time there.
That piece you were just talking about, what publication was it on?
So I wrote an article for Gab News called On Christian Masculinity.
Right, which I want to ask you about. Yeah, it was awesome.
And thank you. The sequel was published today, called Great Men of Christ, St. John Chrysostom. I don't think Tor was emailed it out yet, but he was quoting it on his Gab account and posted a link to it.
Okay.
And then she wrote a Substack article complaining about it.
Oh.
Now, when I first looked into her, I saw she'd been published by the Washington Post and Rolling Stone. I thought, oh, this is going to be a high-profile hit piece.
Right. I
called my dad to warn him, because, he likes the Washington Post, and said, well, if you wake up and see a picture of your son tomorrow calling me a Nazi, I just want to explain what's going on. But then I realized she's just a very low-tier blogger who happened to have a piece or two published by a formerly serious publication, and then nothing came of it at all. But yeah, I've given her weeks worth of material, so
There you go.
I hope she's enjoying the fame that I brought her.
Yeah, I'll definitely link in the show notes to your a lot of your stuff, but the
Oh, thank you.
masculinity, Christian masculinity piece, and if the sequel's available, I will do that as well. Let's talk about that for a second. So we read it as a family. It was a long piece, the part one on Christian masculinity, and I have 3 sons, twins that are 13 and a 14-year-old son. So
Oh wow.
it was really hitting on a lot of things. So how we can move forward raising our sons as the next generation of Orthodox leaders, or just lay people, family men, they could be monks, whatever. Tell me why you felt inspired to write that piece.
Man, that's a good question. I just try to stay in a prayerful state as much as possible, which is not always doable. Obviously, you know, conflicts happen. You got to go to work and do stuff. Ideas just kind of come to me, whether it's for books or articles or videos or whatever. Like, it's not like I have a big list of subjects I want to address. I just what I try to do, like if you think of a Venn diagram, there's like what I'm interested in, what other people are interested in, and then I try to hit that center where I don't want to write about something that I don't care about, because I'm going to hate doing it the whole time. Like, I can't be in some field where I'm just following trends and talking about things that other people find interesting if I don't care. At the same time, I don't want to just talk about what's interesting to me if other people don't care, because then I'm just talking to myself and it's a waste of my time. So I know this is an issue that's on a lot of people's minds. I mean, you see the success of the secular masculinity movement, the self-help for men movement, or movement sphere, realm, whatever you want to call it. And there's a lot of young guys that are really, really lost and hurting. Yeah. And I don't want them to be captivated by these secular people on YouTube, especially guys that, you know, will charge thousands of dollars for a masculinity coaching session. And then half the time there was this big incident this week where one of them turned out to have done like cuck porn or something. So you want to stay away from these people, right? And give them real examples of what a man should be, which means an Orthodox Christian man, ideally a leader of some kind who can guide you through his own life and works and deeds and thoughts and words into what kind of man you should mold yourself into as well. So that was kind of my idea, and then it was very successful. You know, a lot of people liked the article. I didn't realize at the time how big Gab's email list was. It's certainly the biggest reach that anything I've ever done has ever seen. I mean, the list is 4 million people. Wow. And I have a few thousand subscribers on YouTube, you know, a couple thousand on Telegram. So yeah, I'm just glad that people liked it, you know, glory to God.
And one of the things that I like about it is it shows the balance, masculinity and gentleness. You know, it's both. And that's one of the things I love about Orthodoxy is it's always a balance. Like whenever there's a struggle in my mind about something, usually whatever the sides are, they're not mutually exclusive. And this leads me to one of my last questions. You know, there's this, you know, hesychast thing, which is like quietism and asceticism, which, you know, we're supposed to do sometimes, but also speaking out, defending the faith, defending loved ones, defending yourself, that those, you know, it takes discernment, right? So do you ever get pushback that, oh, why are you just doing what you're doing? You're just a convert and you're just a guy and you didn't go to seminary. You know, let the experts handle this. Do you ever get that kind of pushback?
Not that you didn't go to seminary one, but I have heard like you've only been Orthodox for a few years. Why are you doing this? And, you know, maybe they do have a point. I don't know. But people seem to be appreciating what I do. And, you know, a lot of clergy support my work, which is a good guidepost to me that I'm doing something right. Because if they were all telling me how wrong I was, I would be kind of scared, you know, for my own spiritual well-being. Right. But I've always been this kind of person where when I find something interesting or helpful, I just try to share it with people. So my core personality hasn't changed. Even when I was back in my like pickup days, when I was trying to share like tips on how to pick up a girl at a bar, like I would write an article about it or someone would pay me to do a video about it. Like that part of my personality hasn't changed, but thank God I'm doing this in the right way now, and, you know, repenting of my former stuff. I wasn't able to get all my old pickup stuff off the internet, unfortunately. But I just stopped doing it, took down as much as I could.
Yeah.
I kind of took the same path Roosh did, but on a much smaller scale.
Right.
But yeah, I'm sure someday people will find some old thing that I wrote and attack me for it. But it's not like I've been trying to hide this or anything. So
right.
So people can give me pushback, and when they give me pushback that or feedback that's meaningful, I take it to heart, or I'll bring it to the priest and ask about it. In fact, my debate with Dr. Bob that started so well and ended so horribly, I was really kind of horrified by how angry I got during that debate, because I'm not an angry person. I'm usually in a pretty calm mood. And I was feeling really bad about it, but this is how I met Father Turbo, was he commented on it and said that I'd done a great job. I said, okay, well, maybe I didn't do as horrible of a job as I thought. I got a lot of pushback from the Orthodox on that I had made them look stupid, made the Orthodox look bad and everything. And on some level, there were parts of that debate where I did lose my temper and say things I shouldn't have said, or with a tone I shouldn't have used. And so I got on the phone with Father Turbo. We talked for a long time just to suss each other out, see if we wanted to work together. And now we did our great interview, which I had such a great time. He was the first clergy I had on my show, or the first priest, I should say. And now he joined Patristic Faith as well.
I didn't know that.
So it's great to see that I don't think he's done anything yet, but he's on the team. He's a really interesting guy. A lot of people after that interview said, wow, he really helped me more than almost anyone trying to get to Orthodoxy. This guy that I'd only seen once before in a context that no longer is true for him, of being part of this kind of racial stuff. It's turned out to be a great guy. And so that debate, as passionate as I got on it and embarrassed myself, I think, a little bit, led to some good stuff.
And for people who don't know, Patristic Faith is the brainchild of Father Deacon Ananias, correct?
Well, it was kind of a conglomerate at first, because we had our Montana speaking event earlier this year, where I gave a speech, Father Deacon gave a speech, Jay Dyer and David Patrick Harry gave a speech at Carroll College in Montana, where Father Deacon is a philosophy professor.
Okay.
And so with ancient faith deplatforming Abbot Trifon and promoting the vaccine and all this stuff, there was kind of this nebulous idea, like we should do something, have some platform. And it took a while to come to fruition. We came up with the name. We were going back and forth on different ideas. I jokingly suggested realancientfaith.com. But our concern with Patristic Faith was we didn't want to get it confused with Patristic Nectar, Father Josiah's platform. We didn't want people to confuse them.
Right.
But we ended up going with that. And I'll be honest, I didn't think it was actually going to happen due to certain dynamics within the other people saying, I don't want to be part of it. If this guy's part of it, I was like, this is just never going to happen. But I was trying to help out, and say, let me help out as much as I can, hoping it comes to fruition, but without investing in it. And now it's turned into this thing that's just going to keep growing. They already have 150 people in their Telegram chat. We got 2,000 views on that live stream. When was that? Tuesday, within a few hours, I think. I met Father John Whiteford for the first time on that stream. I just kind of sat there quietly for 20 minutes and then left, but it continued on for a long time after I went to work. It looks like it's turning into something nice, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of pushback from the liberal docs sect or from ancient faith. They're already kind of panicking about losing market share. They have their whole website now of don't look at bad people on the internet, look at us.
Right.
Click this button to learn more from qualified people.
Right.
They're already starting to feel the slip a little bit. And if you look at their YouTube video counts, I mean, it's understandable.
Oh, yeah.
But they really have a lot of podcasting power, though.
And I find it fascinating that y'all are building this thing at the same time we're working on the fellowship. Different things, but with the same goal. Letting people know what Orthodoxy is, opening that door for people so they'll come and taste and see, hopefully, God willing. And it's a really great thing, too. And I think it kind of bucks the notion where it's like you have to have a PhD or have gone to seminary or be clergy to have an opinion of your faith, which is the central aspect of your life. Because you've got clergy and laity, just like we do. We have 4 founders, only one is a priest, 2 PhDs, and then little old me with just my lacking homemaking skills and my bachelor's degree. But it's beautiful, just like the patristic faith thing. That's what the church is. It's all sorts of different people, but we pull together to promote the faith.
I mean, some
of the
most zealous saints probably couldn't even read going back through history, like what seminary did the apostles go to?
Right.
That'll tell you what you need to be clergy, and you can study theology all day until you're blue in the face.
Right.
A lot of it, there's a danger of studying theology too. Like there are people that make an idol of it, turns into theolatry rather than theology, where it's all about rigorism and legalism and having all the right opinions and everything. And there is some stuff you do have to have the right opinion on, for sure. We do have dogmas that you have to adhere to be Orthodox. But there's also a lot of, I don't want to say minutia, but there's a lot of stuff where people had a lot of free time. They're off in their cabin for 20 years writing and, not knowing what one specific saint meant by the use of some specific Greek word. Like, does that really affect my salvation? I don't know.
Right.
It's above my pay grade, but
Right.
I try to focus on what I can do, to help myself and the people around me, bring people to the faith. And yeah, theology is a tricky thing. I think you should not study it if you're still living in unrepentant mortal sin, certainly, because then it's just going to harm you more than it helps you. Is Father John part of your fellowship?
Mm-hmm.
Is he the priest you mentioned?
Yes,
oh, great.
He is.
Great.
Yeah, he does everything. It's amazing. And he does it so calmly and never gets seemingly stressed out about anything. Yeah, Father John Whiteford is one of our founding members. Yep.
Great.
So hold on, it left me. It's coming back. Okay. Yeah. So you picked Augustine as your patron saint, and I heard you telling, I think it was a devotional heart, that you like him because he was right about a lot of things, but wrong about a lot of things, but he also tried to correct his error, right? And you had said that early on when you were, kind of just describing yourself in the beginning of the interview, that, if you said, if I'm making a mistake, let me know, I'll fix it. I'll think about it. I'll pray about it. And a lot of people don't fit in that mold anymore either. They either double down on the error or just pretend they never said it, So tell us a little bit more, just a little bit about Augustine and why he spoke to you, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure. So his book Confessions is one of the most beautiful things ever written. I think that it's the first autobiography ever written in terms of literature, period. What's interesting about it is up until his time, you had all these saints and monks and priests and bishops talking about how to overcome sin, talking about vices and virtues and how demons work, but none of them said, and here's how this played out in my life. They were very hesitant to share personal examples. Whereas Augustine, Confessions, was it Hemingway who said this? I think it was Hemingway who said, writing is easy. Cut yourself and bleed on the page. I feel like that's very much what Confessions was. It was Augustine bleeding all over the page, saying, hey, here's all the things I ever did wrong, starting from when he's an infant, like manipulating for his own selfish gain. Like, as he's confessing things before he could even speak words that he had felt he had done wrong. Just telling his whole story, laying it all out there, not hiding, being vulnerable, I think is just so great. And then towards the end of his career, he wrote a book. It's either called Recantations or Retractions, I forget which one, where he went through some of his older works and corrected himself, including, and Roman Catholics, quote unquote, the Latins don't like this, including his belief that the rock of faith was the Pope, was one of the things he recanted later, where he said earlier, there's that verse of, I say that you are Peter, and on this rock I shall build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. Christ says to Peter. He says, earlier I believed this was the person of Peter, but I think you could also interpret it as being the apostles or Christ himself. And then he ends that sentiment by saying, I leave this up to the reader to decide what the rock was. So it's not that he was saying that Peter wasn't the rock, but he's saying, I'm not so sure right now as I used to be. And the Latins hold this guy up as a doctor of the church, interestingly enough. I think he was probably the most prolific writer in history, if I'm not mistaken. I think Origen was up there with him. St. John Chrysostom, very prolific, not quite as much stuff. Guy wrote, I want to say 140 books and letters, something in that realm. Helped deal with the Donatist schism. Just a really unbelievably pious guy. Had been through all these mistakes, obviously. There are guys like St. Joseph the Hesychast that were, pretty pure even as kids, relatively speaking. Like they never really got in any serious trouble. And stories like Augustine's are so impactful because it says, hey, maybe you got yourself an enormous amount of troubles. Maybe you had a child with your concubine, like Augustine did, but you can still become a saint, right? Repent, turn your back on that, do a total 180, give your life to Christ, and you can be saved. I think that's a very important message that people need to hear. Like that's what I needed to hear when I was living in filth. I didn't need to hear, the church fathers explaining some high level theology. What I needed to hear was, doesn't matter how bad you've been, you can still be saved. Sometimes that simple message is really what gets people in the door, what they need to hear. Study theology later, right?
Mhm.
If you look at how Apostle Paul and the apostles preached in general in the New Testament, that's what they preached to convert people. It was Christ crucified and resurrected, right? Salvation is possible. Then once they were within the church, they would learn the church stuff, right? But the message, the evangelistic message, the gospel, the good news is you can be saved no matter how evil you've been, no matter how deep in the hole you think you are. And sometimes I feel like we lose sight of that simplicity when we're doing our ministries and stuff and talking about the high tier theology, what is monothelite versus monophysite, and what saints' writings do they twist into this? Like, that frankly doesn't matter to people that are living a life of filth and they're on the verge of suicide because they're so depressed and miserable over their life. What they need to hear is, hey, you can be healed. Worry about the other stuff later. And so part of why I do what I do is to just try and talk to different groups of people all at the same time. God willing, with some level of success, where I try to talk to people that are already Orthodox, try to talk to people that are inquiring into it, try to talk to people that are not even believing in Christ at all yet. You know, there's all these different groups of people that I'm trying to target when I do my ministry, speaking to them for where they're at. And I think Augustine was just a great example of that. He wrote all these books on Christian doctrine and on rhetoric and how to teach and how to preach and all this stuff. I mean, I haven't even finished that book yet. He defended the use of rhetoric in preaching and ministry, you know, the use of choosing your words carefully and deliberately instead of just being boring. You know, he has a whole passage about not being boring if you're trying to teach Christianity. And the reason he gives is the pagans all study rhetoric. They're great speakers. And if you're boring, you're letting people go to them because you're too lazy to learn how to speak as well as they do. Now, obviously, you want to use good words, good messaging for the glory of God to bring people there, not for yourself, like many persuaders on the internet do, influencers, NLP and hypnosis and all this stuff. But you still want to understand the mechanics of speaking and writing, and then use every tool at your disposal to bring people to God. Because like he said, if you don't, you're letting people like Jordan Peterson, to draw a modern example,
Right.
Captivate the minds of people. Frankly, I don't think he's a good speaker, but I know a lot of people do. Or like Obama, good example. Yeah. Excellent speeches in terms of mechanics, but that's not bringing people to God.
Right.
And if you let people like Obama give those speeches and convince you of abortion and progressivism just because you couldn't be bothered to read a book about how to talk, well, then you're giving up territory for free to the enemy. Now, the really interesting thing he said about rhetoric is that if you want to be a good speaker and writer, don't study the art of speaking and writing, just listen to good speakers and read good books, and that you'll naturally pick up on the patterns of effective communication that way, which I think is a really interesting point that he made, and a very good point too.
Yeah, and I like the fact that he defended rhetoric, because a lot of times that's what people say now. Oh, you know, just only worry about your own soul. You know, the culture wars is a myth or whatever, or you're being too political, when this is a salvation issue. And also, it's not just helping other people. I mean, my goodness, I have a lot of work to do on myself, but also God gave me a talent. I'm a pretty good writer. Why would I not use that? You're an excellent speaker. Exactly. And thank God. Not using that, I think, would not be a good thing. So thank God you do use it, because I'm a huge Brother Augustine fan. And tell us your last thoughts, anything we haven't touched on, and of course, plug anything. If you don't feel like plugging it, I'll put it all in the show notes anyway. But parting words, sir.
Parting words. Okay, I've got some parting words.
All right.
I'm going to read a quote because the saints are wiser than me. A quote from Saint Tikhon of Zdansk. Are you familiar with him?
I believe so, yes.
So here's my ending speech, or spiel, as my people might say. Okay. Many Christians desire to be with Christ the Lord when he is glorified, but they do not wish to be with him in dishonor and reproach, nor to carry their cross. They entreat him that they may come into his kingdom, but they do not wish to suffer in the world, and thereby they show that their heart is not right and that they do not truly love Christ. And to tell the truth, they love themselves more than Christ. And the reason that quote's so important is because it plays into what we're talking about, of putting yourself out there, preaching the gospel, you know, rebuking heretics where necessary. If you don't have the gift of speaking and writing, then no harm, no foul. You have other talents you can use to glorify God. But if you do, and you choose not to use them because you fear blowback, then according to this amazing saint, you love yourself more than Christ. So you owe it to God, to yourself, and to your potential audience to use your talents as well as you can to glorify him and not worry about the blowback or criticism that you might get from a world that hates Christ and hates you anyway.
Wow, you couldn't have ended it any better way. That's powerful stuff, and you can see my shirt here just says no. That's going to kind of be my motto of 2022. You want to throw people under the bus? No, not going to do it. You want to be weak? No, not going to do it. Be strong for Christ.
Amen.
Love your family and your community, and be bold and loving, like Brother Augustine. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, you have a wonderful New Year's Eve, which is tomorrow night. And I would love to just stay in touch with you. And I wish you just the best luck and prayers on all of your endeavors.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you. Bye-bye.